You volunteered to cram into a steel tube meant for 54, often with 80 sweating men, knowing 1 in 5 never returned. In 1943, the Pacific was not just the deadliest front. It was a furnace where submariners spent months breathing recycled air and sleeping beside live torpedoes, hunted as often as they hunted. Before a single torpedo was fired, brutal training and claustrophobic sacrifice shaped every patrol. What drove men to join the most dangerous duty in World War II, and what did survival really cost them? Nobody assigned you to submarines by accident. You signed up knowing the risks, drawn by the promise of 50% extra pay and the reputation that only volunteers walked through the gate at New London Submarine School. The instructors wasted no time reminding you that submarines claimed more lives than any other branch of the Navy. You learned to operate diesel engines that could fill a compartment with choking fumes if you missed a step. You traced electrical schematics until you could recite every breaker and relay in your sleep. Torpedo mechanics, damage control, firefighting, every man had to master every system. If a pipe burst or a fire broke out at 300 feet, there was no one else coming. The escape tower loomed over the training grounds, a 100-foot column of cold water waiting for your first ascent. You strapped on a Momsen lung, an awkward rubber rebreather that tasted of rubber and fear, and stepped into the dark. Some men panicked, some blacked out, a few never made it to the surface. You learned to trust the gear, to keep calm as the pressure squeezed your chest and the world narrowed to bubbles and heartbeat. Earning your dolphins was not a ceremony, it was a gauntlet. You had to prove you could find a leak in the dark, fix a jammed valve by touch, and know the quickest route to the escape hatch blindfolded. Until you passed, you were a nub, non-qualified, sleeping light, and studying heavy, always under the watchful eyes of veterans who had survived patrols. The moment you pinned on those silver dolphins, you were not just a sailor. You were a submariner, part of a crew that would trust you with their lives and expect you to do the same. The first time you stepped onto a Gato-class submarine, the scale hit you all at once. 311 feet of steel, barely wider than a city bus, divided into 10 watertight compartments. Every inch was packed with machinery, weapons, and the men who ran them. 4 diesel engines, each the size of a delivery truck, lined the aft engine rooms. On the surface, those diesels roared to life, driving the boat at 14 knots and charging the batteries for the silent running that kept you alive underwater. Once submerged, the diesels shut down and the boat ran on electric motors, quiet but slow. At full charge, you could creep along at 2.5 knots for about a day and a half before the batteries ran dry, less if you pushed the speed. Forward of the engines, the manoeuvring room bristled with controls, levers, gauges and switches to balance the boat and keep the power flowing. Next came the crew's quarters, a narrow passage lined with bunks and lockers, leading to the galley where cooks worked miracles in a space no bigger than a walk-in closet. The control room sat at the heart of the boat, crammed with dials, valves, and the periscope well, a nerve centre where every patrol was run. Above, the conning tower held the attack periscope and the torpedo data computer, a mechanical brain that turned bearings and speed into firing solutions. Armament was everywhere. Forward and aft torpedo rooms each held 6 tubes, with racks for 24 Mark 14 torpedoes, 20 feet long and 3,000 pounds apiece. On deck, a 4-inch gun and anti-aircraft mounts waited for surface action. Every space was tight, every system vital. On a Gato, the boat itself was as much a crew member as any man aboard. You learnt to move through its passageways by memory, knowing that in a crisis, seconds mattered, and the steel around you was both your shield and your prison. The air inside a submarine never felt clean. Heat pressed in from every side, 90 degrees, sometimes 110 degrees, hotter still in the engine rooms. Sweat soaked through skivvies in minutes. After the first week, most men gave up on uniforms, stripping down to underwear and shower shoes. Condensation dripped from every surface, pooling in corners, turning bunks and lockers clammy. You slept 3 high in racks wedged between torpedoes, the steel hull inches from your face, a 3,000-pound warhead for a pillow. If you were unlucky, your rack was still warm from the last man. Hot bunking meant sharing beds on opposite shifts, the smell of another man's sweat always present. Privacy did not exist. The only barrier was a thin curtain around your bunk, barely enough to block out the red night lights or the sound of a shipmate snoring. One head for the entire crew, and a single shower, rationed to once a week if the distilled water held out. By the 10th day, the scent of diesel, body odour, and cigarette smoke mixed with the tang of canned food and oil. Everything, blankets, towels, even bread, felt damp. A junior sailor might lie awake, listening to the hum of the ventilation fans and the distant thump of machinery, counting the hours until his next watch. Some men coped by reading dog-eared paperbacks, or writing letters they knew would never be mailed. Others just stared at the rivets overhead, thinking about the odds. Survival was never guaranteed. 1 in 5 would not come back. The casualty rate, 22%, hung over every patrol, a silent number no one needed to say aloud. On a submarine, you learnt to live with discomfort, with fear, and with the knowledge that every dive could be your last. Pearl Harbor in 1943 was a blur of activity before every patrol. The boat docked at the submarine base for a 2-week refit, and the supply officer's checklist ran longer than most men's nerves. 50,000 pounds of food and gear had to be crammed into every inch of steel, fresh bread, eggs and milk for the first days, then cans, dried beans, and powdered eggs for the rest. Potatoes filled lockers, canned milk lined the shower floor, and heads of cabbage were wedged between torpedoes. The galley crew stashed flour in the bilges and coffee tins under bunks. Every man knew that by week 3 the bread would go stale and the eggs would taste like sulphur, but nobody complained. Resupply was survival. Ammunition and armament followed. 24 Mark 14 torpedoes, each hoisted aboard with the care of handling live lightning. Deck guns were checked, 20mm and 50 caliber rounds stacked in corners. Shore crews swarmed over the hull, patching dings, welding seams, checking the radar for faults. The boat was designed for 54 men, but 70 or more would squeeze aboard, each man with a duffel bag and a letter home tucked in his locker. Liberty in Honolulu was a last taste of freedom before the ocean closed in. Submarine sailors hit Hotel Street hard, their reputation for drinking and brawling well earned. Shore patrols kept a watchful eye, but everyone understood. Men about to vanish for 2 months needed to blow off steam. Some spent their last hours on the beach, others in bars, a few writing letters they would never mail. The air on the pier the morning of departure was thick with salt and unspoken fear. Families waved, but no one asked when the boat would return. Orders were sealed, destination secret. Engines rumbled, lines cast off, and the shoreline slipped away. Once the harbour mouth faded astern, every man aboard knew the only way home was forward, into enemy waters, with everything they might need already packed inside that steel hull. Every hour on patrol, the rhythm never changed. 4 hours on watch, 8 hours off. The boat ran like a clock, each man rotating through the same cycle, day after day. You learn to sleep through the hiss of air compressors, the thump of machinery, and the steady drone of fans, anything except the dive klaxon. In the control room, the engineering petty officer logged battery levels and engine temperatures, his pencil scratching in the red-lit dark. The cook, already sweating by dawn, kneaded dough for bread that would be stale by week 2, measuring out coffee grounds like gold dust to keep the crew sharp through endless nights. The AIR was a living thing. Each dive, the fresh tang vanished fast, replaced by sweat, diesel, and the faint bite of soda lime from the carbon dioxide scrubbers. After a few days submerged, the air thickened, growing heavy in your lungs. Men smoked cigarettes to calm nerves, adding another layer to the stew. The old-timers had a test. Strike a match, watch the flame. If it sputtered out, the carbon dioxide was too high. Time to surface, or risk blacking out before you ever heard the order. The hunt began in darkness. Surfaced at night, the bridge crew scanned the horizon, the officer of the deck, lookouts, and a pair of binoculars for every set of eyes. The radar operator hunched over the SJ surface search radar, searching for a blip that might be a convoy 15,000 yards away. Each sector had its own dangers: Japanese air patrols by day, destroyers by night. Orders from Commander, Submarine Force, Pacific listed targets by priority. Tankers first, then cargo ships, anything that would choke the enemy's supply lines. Between watches, men gathered in the mess, trading jokes, playing cards, or quizzing the newest nub on emergency procedures. Brotherhood grew in the routine, trust built not just on shared danger, but on the small rituals repeated every day. You learnt the faces, the habits, the sound of a friend's laugh echoing down a steel corridor. The monotony was its own kind of pressure, a slow grind that wore at nerves even before the first contact alarm sounded. Contact always started with a whisper. A faint blip on the SJ radar, 15,000 yards out. Just a flicker in the night. The captain called for battle stations. Every man snapped to his post, nerves tingling, sweat already slick on the palms. In the cramped conning tower, the captain, the executive officer, and the TDC operator pressed shoulder to shoulder. The attack periscope hissed up for a 2-second look. Convoy, 3 ships, 2 destroyers zigzagging ahead. Down scope. Orders snapped out. Helm left 5 degrees, all stop. Bring her to periscope depth. The TDC operator's hands worked the dials, feeding in target speed, course, and angle on the bow. The mechanical computer clattered and spun, spitting out a firing solution. Every number mattered. A 10-foot error could mean a clean miss, or worse, a dud. Torpedo doors flooded. The captain ordered up scope for a quick sweep, range, bearing, still on course, fire 1. The hydraulic whoosh sent a Mark 14 sliding from its tube, the boat shuddering as 2, 3, 4 more followed. Then silence, every ear strained for the sound of a hit, a metallic echo, a distant thud, the shock wave that meant a kill. 60 seconds crawled by, 90, nothing. The torpedoes had run deep, passing harmlessly under the target. On some boats, magnetic exploders had already been turned off, but even contact exploders could fail, shearing pins on impact and leaving a perfect shot wasted. The frustration was like acid. Skippers cursed the Bureau of Ordnance under their breath. Men risked their lives for a weapon that sometimes would not do its job. With the convoy alerted, the captain had a choice: reload and try again, or surface and use the deck gun. Sometimes, in the dark before dawn, the order came: surface, man the gun. The bridge hatch slammed open, salty air rushing in. The gun crew scrambled topside, shells clattering, hands slick with sweat and fear. The 4-inch barked, sending rounds into a merchant's hull. Every flash risked drawing enemy fire, but sometimes it was the only way to finish what the torpedoes could not. Each attack was a gamble, against the enemy, against the clock, and against their own defective weapons. The men adapted, adjusting torpedo depth settings, deactivating magnetic exploders, trusting their training and each other. But every failed shot meant the enemy had their bearings, and destroyers would be coming fast. The next sound would not be a cheer. It would be the metallic ping of sonar and the rising thump of depth charges hunting the hunters in the dark. The order comes from the bridge, the enemy destroyer closing fast. No time to think. Take her deep, rig for silent running. The crash dive slams through the boat. Hatches are dogged, lights go to red, every man at his station. The control room team calls out depths, 200 feet, 250 feet, 300 feet. The hull creaks and groans as the boat pushes past the official limit, down to 350 feet, then 400 feet. You feel the pressure in your teeth, in your bones. Screws thrash overhead, sonar pings bouncing off the steel skin. The first depth charge lands close, a metallic thunderclap, the world shaking like you are trapped inside a bell. Cork insulation rains from the seams, light bulbs burst, deck plates jump under your boots. The pattern walks in, charges set shallow, then deep, bracketing the boat. The air fills with the smell of ozone, oil. In the torpedo room, men squeeze hands or clutch the pipes, eyes locked on the overhead as rivets flex and water sprays from new leaks. The temperature climbs, heat pouring off every face, shirts plastered to skin. In the engine spaces it hits 120 degrees. The AIR is thick, heavy with carbon dioxide. Breathing gets harder, each lungful tasting stale and sour. The last reserves of patience and strength thin as the hours drag on. The crew moves on instinct. The engineering watch checks batteries and meters, each explosion draining more power, every minute underwater costing precious amps. The chief listens for the destroyer, counting seconds between pings, tracking the enemy's hunt. The captain whispers orders, voice steady, hands never shaking. You learn to freeze, to make no sound. Every clang, every dropped wrench could mean death. Hours pass like a fever dream. Some men faint from the heat. Others sit with their eyes closed, lips moving in silent prayers. The only relief is the occasional joke, the dark humour that keeps terror at bay. The air grows so foul a match will not stay lit. The last reserves of battery and courage run thin. Finally the captain gives the order, blow ballast. The roar of compressed air fills the boat, and the hull groans as the submarine claws for the surface. Hatches crack open, and fresh air rushes in, cold and clean. Every man gulps it down like water after a drought. Damage is everywhere. Broken bulbs, leaking pipes, sweat-soaked bodies. But the boat survived. The destroyer is gone, or maybe just lost the scent. For now, there is only the sound of men breathing, and the knowledge that training and luck held the line this time. The risks those submariners faced didn't vanish. They echo every time a modern crew dives beneath the waves, trusting steel and each other. Today, the US Navy's Dolphins pin still marks a commitment few can fathom. Absolute reliance on your shipmates when the world above forgets you exist. That silent brotherhood endures, reminding us what sacrifice really means. Share your thoughts or stories in the comments below.